Hello, my name is Lakin Poe, and today's date is April 2nd, 2019. I'm at Grandview Middle School in Hickory, North Carolina, interviewing Timothy Moore about his military experiences in the United States Army during Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom. Thank you for joining us today. Before we go any further, can you please spell your full name?
Timothy Moore, that's Timothy. Middle name James, James. Last name Moore, Moore.
Thank you. Would you tell me a little bit about your childhood, family, and where you grew up?
I grew up in Arizona, actually, late 80s, early 90s. Average kid. I like riding my bike and doing stupid things that got me in trouble and got me hurt. During high school, I was a wrestler, and I played soccer, and I was on the swim team as well in Arizona. Shortly after I got out of high school, I decided that I wanted to give the military a try and see where that took me. I was a freshman in high school when 9/11 happened, so that had a major impact on my life. And my mom was actually visiting, was supposed to do a tour of the Pentagon when the plane struck.
Did you have any family members in the military?
My grandfather was in the Korean War. Other than that, no other family history of military.
What was the highest rank that you held in the service?
I was a sergeant in the Army. Was promotable to staff sergeant, but due to some other circumstances, I wasn't able to pin on staff sergeant, which is E6.
Do you recall the day you left for the service? What do you remember?
Oh, I was excited and anxious and nervous. I wasn't sure what I was getting myself into, but I knew that I needed a little bit more direction in life than what I was able to do for myself, so I gave the military a shot.
Did your parents support your choice to go into the military?
At first, no. My mom was very opposed to it, mostly because she was afraid. My dad was opposed to it for political reasons and didn't want me to serve in the military because he was opposed to the war. I joined a few years after 9/11 occurred, so things had already started settling down a little bit as far as the initial shock of everything and the reasons we were over there. So they weren't entirely supportive of me initially, but as my time in the service continued and as they saw how I changed as a person, they definitely became supportive of me in the military.
Would you tell me about your experience in boot camp?
Oh man, boot camp was a lot of fun. Looking back at it, I can say that now. During the time, I did not think it was fun at all. Minimal sleep, on a good night we got maybe 2 to 3 hours of sleep. A lot of physical activity. Mass punishment was a thing. So if my buddy to my left messed up, well then not only was my buddy getting in trouble, but so was everyone else around him. And that's really kind of how I acclimated into the military service. A lot of push-ups, a lot of flutter kicks, a lot of physical exertion.
What other training and or schooling did you have while in the Army?
I went through parachutist school, airborne school, and I was airborne qualified for the vast majority of my career. And then I also went through selection for Special Operations Aviation Regiment 160th.
Prior to leaving for deployment to Iraq, what had you heard about the country in combat from fellow veterans?
I came in 2007, so we'd already been overseas for several years at that point. So there were a lot of people who had that deployment experience before me. So I leaned on them for their experience and their guidance. If somebody told me not to do something, it was for a reason, and I listened to it. I was very scared when I first deployed. It wasn't until, well, I guess it took me about 2 weeks to really realize that I was there and that it was real. It was all kind of surreal to me at first.
Prior to leaving for your first deployment, what were you thinking and feeling?
Before my first deployment, definitely fear, excitement, concern. I was worried about my family back home, and if something should happen to me, how would my parents take it? How would my sisters take it? So I was very attentive to the training because I knew that even what seemed meaningless was could potentially be important down the road.
What do you remember about your first flight to the Middle East?
It was the longest flight of my life. I had a couple of guys who brought a bottle of Tylenol PM, and they said, "Hey man, take a couple Tylenol PMs as soon as we got on that plane, go to sleep, wake up when they come bring you food, take some more Tylenol PM, go back to sleep. That's the only way you're going to get through it." So that's how I traveled every time I went overseas. Was taking a bunch of Tylenol PM and sleeping as much as possible. Pardon me. Watched a couple movies, but when I got there, it was a completely different world.
Can you elaborate what you mean by a completely different world?
Buildings even looked different. Houses, what we know as houses, even a average home in our culture would be considered a mansion in the Middle East. A lot of the homes were mud huts in the area that I was at in Iraq. There were a lot of what you would consider apartment complexes, but yeah, just the whole city structure was different. The roadways were completely different. Advertising, we take that for granted. If you drive down the highway, you see billboards for different companies or different advertisements, and that was pretty much non-existent over there. Their gas pumps where kids were running around with milk jugs full of gasoline and selling them at the cars who were stopped in traffic. So it was just a completely different culture over there.
What do you remember most about your time in Iraq?
We were on the road a lot. So I was constantly doing combat patrols in Iraq, and that was my first deployment. So kind of a way to break the monotony and relax, kind of de-stress, if you will. We would have mass royal rumbles. One person would get somebody in a headlock, and then the entire platoon would jump in, and we'd all just be free-for-all boxing and kickboxing and fighting each other, and that's how we de-stressed and got over some of our issues from the previous week. So that was a lot of fun. That's probably one of my more fond memories of that deployment.
What was your primary mission in Iraq?
My primary mission in Iraq was route clearance, convoy security, and high-value target transportation.
Could you describe a typical day in Iraq?
My typical day, when I was in Iraq, I was there 2009 to 2010. So there was an agreement going on where minimal forces were permitted on the roadways during the day. So most of our missions took place at night. So I slept a lot during the day. I'd get up, go to the gym for a couple of hours, grab something to eat if I was on the base, and then we would check all of our weapon systems, make sure everything was clean and serviceable and was capable to fire, and then we would load up load up our trucks for our convoy and our mission for that day, and then go through a mission brief, and then we'd roll out. And most of the time when we were on the road about 6 days out of the week.
Besides your Royal Rumbles, what were fun things you did in Iraq on your free time?
I slept. I was going to school at the same time when I was in Iraq, and I was doing online school, maintained a pretty good GPA through all that. We would go to the Haji shops and buy movies, DVDs for $2 a piece. So we would find just random movies, ones that we had never even heard of before, and hey, it's only $2, let's buy 20 of them. So we'd watch movies from time to time. And practical jokes were necessary. We constantly had practical jokes going on between the different platoons and everything, so it was a lot of fun.
What is high-value target transportation?
High-value target, if there's like a colonel or higher that needed to go to a meeting on another base, and air was red, so that they couldn't fly, and a helicopter to get from one base to another, we would go and pick them up and transport them. We also transported some high-value insurgents, captives. So it really varied on a day-by-day basis.
In the survey you completed prior to this interview, you described the enemy as cowards, and you said they used their cowardice to their advantage. Could you please describe what you meant by this?
So with that association, the rules of engagement during the time that I was overseas in Iraq, we had to have positive identification on someone actually actively engaging us. So they had to be shooting at us in order for us to return fire. So a lot of times they would, hide up in buildings and take one or two shots at us, and then they would disappear. So there was never a truly positively identified target for us to engage. And then, also the use of roadside bombs, improvised explosive devices. The military came up with Duke systems and different things to block frequencies, like from cell phones or remote controls, to be able to remote control detonate the IEDs. So a lot of it was command wire, so somebody actually having a wire going from the bomb to a button where they would have to push it, or pressure plates, two plates where when they touch, they close the circuit, and that triggers the explosive. So there were a lot of IEDs in the area that I was in. But we didn't have an enemy that we could face and look at and say, okay, I know he's going to try and kill me, so I need to kill him first. It was a lot of, you don't know who your enemy is when I was over there.
What were you thinking and feeling when you found out you were going to Afghanistan?
Afghanistan was a little bit different for me. My first deployment, I was single, didn't have any children. Afghanistan, I was a relatively newlywed and had a daughter who was very young. I mean, just a few months old. So I was a little bit, I was more excited about that second deployment because I knew how much I learned personally from my first deployment and how much I developed as an individual. But I was a little bit more conflicted with leaving my wife and my child at home.
What was your mission in Afghanistan?
When I was in Afghanistan, I was a helicopter mechanic at that point in my career, so I was just a aircraft maintainer during my second deployment.
What was a typical day like in Afghanistan?
Afghanistan, I worked nights also, repairing helicopters. So through the day I slept, woke up, again, went to the gym, got something to eat, and then I went in to work. And I just fixed helicopters all night. There was a couple of times where we had to go out for down aircraft recovery. One of them was on Thanksgiving Day. Aircraft 155 was doing a landing, and someone detonated a remote det IED, and it blew up the helicopter. So we had to go out and retrieve the helicopter.
What kind of food would you eat?
Well, it depended. If I was, when we were in Iraq, I had a lot of MREs because we were on the road a lot. Every now and then we would eat the local food, which is phenomenal. Really, really good stuff. On occasion, when I was on a base with a chow hall, I would eat at the chow hall. Some bases also had like Taco Bell and Subway and Burger King, I think, were the three primary restaurants out there. So every great once in a while I would eat at one of those places, but that was few and far between.
Did you have any interactions with the civilians during your deployments? If yes, could you describe these experiences?
Yeah, so there was one mission we were coming back from in Iraq. I didn't really have any experiences in Afghanistan because I was on the base the vast majority of the time. But coming back from patrol in Iraq, we had been out for a couple of days and we were all really hungry. So we found we drove by a sheep farmer and we asked him how much it would cost for a sheep. So he said, $250. So collectively we got the money and, pardon me, we bought a sheep from him. And we had a pretty good roast that evening. We all ate sheep for the next day or two. There was a couple other times where we would stop at some of the markets or some of the vendors peddling on the side of the road, and we'd buy bananas from them or fruit from them from time to time. But we didn't, get out of the vehicle very much unless necessary. So we only did that a handful of times.
What do you remember most about returning home after your deployments?
It was difficult coming back from both deployments. It was very stressful. When you're deployed, you have a heightened sense of awareness of your surroundings. So one thing that you hear that you might not think anything of might, trip me up and, make me a little bit more on edge. So that was difficult to overcome. And there was a lot of confusion as far as what am I going to do now after I came back from deployment. We went on leave shortly after coming back both times. So there was a little bit of liberty time to just kind of go and be yourself again, which I didn't really know how to handle at first. Driving a car was extremely weird coming back. Being able to turn on the TV and watch real TV was very strange as well. So a lot of the things that we take advantage of now and that I take advantage of now, I didn't realize how dependent I was on those things until, I didn't have them for an extended period of time.
What was the most amount of time you were gone?
A year.
Do you have any stories or experiences you'd like to share with us today?
I mean, such as, like, do you have an example?
Like some things you would do or something that really stuck with you through your deployments?
The camaraderie that we experienced where, you become reliant on one another really stuck with me. I've been out of the service now for about 2 years, and anytime I see a veteran or, I meet someone who I later determine is a veteran, it seems like we have that stronger bond almost instantaneously because we both kind of understand one another. We both have been through maybe not the exact same, but similar trainings and similar, duty stations or, there's a part of our history that we can relate to that not everyone else in civilian culture is able to. So the camaraderie of deployments is definitely one thing that stuck with me. Another would be the personal growth that I experienced from Iraq and Afghanistan. You realize that you can do a heck of a lot more than you've ever thought yourself capable of. You can go longer without sleep than you thought was possible. You can go longer without food than you thought was possible. You can push yourself to the absolute breaking point and back and, be pretty resilient and bounce back. So I definitely had a lot of really good learning experiences.
Were there any traditions that you used to have when you were in the service?
So we used to, I don't even remember who it was. I think it was my section sergeant from Iraq found this ridiculous song. It's called, the band is Hammerfall, and the song was Any Means Necessary. We used to listen to that song every single time before we rolled out on a mission, and just laughed and goofed off while we were getting ready. So that became tradition very quick early on in our deployment. We listened to that song for every mission for the rest of the year. There was definitely some things that we would do in our own ways to kind of amp ourselves up and get mentally ready for, rolling out, because you never know what's going to happen at any given point in time. So you kind of have to put yourself, go through that mental preparation each time to be able to mentally say, okay, I'm ready, let's do this.
Were you awarded any medals or citations?
Yeah, I've received, pretty standard awards and decorations, Army Commendation Medal, a couple Army Achievement Medals, some campaign badges for both of my deployments, but nothing of major significance. I didn't receive a Purple Heart. My chain of command didn't put in the paperwork for combat action badge or anything like that, so I don't have that reflecting, but realistically, after I've gotten out, I've realized that it's not necessarily so much about the award, because it doesn't really mean anything now. It's something that I just know inside me that, about those experiences and relate to others who've been through similar situations.
Finally, I understand you work with veterans in your current job. Where do you currently work, and can you describe your roles and responsibilities?
Yeah, so I am a state veteran service officer with the North Carolina Department of Military and Veterans Affairs. What I do is I work with veterans to develop claims for service-connected disabilities. I connect them to medical benefits, help them file for pensions. I'm just a veteran advocate. I'm the liaison between the veteran and the VA to help the veteran get as many entitlements as he or she may be eligible for.
Are you still friends with any of the people that you were friends with while you were in service?
Yeah, I have a couple of them. One of them is Rogelio Perez. I used to call him Yo Jelly Roll because he was a little heavy set and he was Hispanic, so I liked making fun of him. Another is Alpo, David Alvarez, really, really good friend of mine. He and I, there were a couple of times that me and Alpo would literally brawl it out. I mean, kicking and, rolling around, punching each other in the face, and knocking each other out. And we get up when we were done with our TIF and dust ourselves off, and we go grab a near beer, because they didn't serve alcohol there, but they had non-alcoholic beers out there. So we go grab a near beer and sit and be like, dude, what was that fight even about? I don't know. You just made me mad. So he and I stay in contact pretty regularly. There's actually quite a few of my friends that I still talk to on a pretty regular basis.
Thank you so much for
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.